This episode of the Fine Homebuilding podcast is brought to you by Loctite's Tight Foam. The best builders take weatherization seriously. When they need to seal a gap that's too small for insulation but big enough to create a draft, they reach for Loctite's Tight Foam. With 3 formulations for everything from small cracks to the biggest gaps, there's a tight foam product for every job, including a low expanding product designed to seal the rough opening around windows and doors. The high-density foam forms a tenacious bond to most common building materials, stays flexible to prevent cracking when materials move, and keeps air, moisture, and pests out of the house. Builders who care about energy efficiency, comfort, and durability choose Tight Foam. Visit LoctiteProducts.com for more information.
The wall was about 10 inches thick of poured concrete, so he and I went down there and I gave it everything I had with the sledgehammer, hit it, and the sledgehammer bounced off the wall, flew out of my hands, and my dad just shook his head.
Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding podcast, our weekly discussion of building, remodeling, and design topics aimed at anybody who cares deeply about the craft and science of working on houses. This is Senior Editor Patrick McComb. Today I'm joined by Kiley Jacques, GBA Senior Advisor.
Hello,
Editor.
everybody. I think that's Mike Mains's position.
Operations Manager for TDS Custom Construction, Ian Schwant.
Hello.
And producer Jeff Rose.
Hi there.
Please email your questions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. You can find previous podcasts and check out the show notes at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. Well, it is a pleasure to see you all this morning. I hope you all are well.
Very
Nice
well.
to see you too.
Boy, Ian, you've had an epic adventure. I don't want to talk about it too much in the pre-show here, but we are going to talk about it at length in the after show, I hope. Do you want to tell folks where you were?
Yeah, I thought you were going to refer to me in the opening as World Traveler.
Globetrotter.
Yeah. This all started when our beloved Green Bay Packers were picked to play in the London game, which got us thinking we should go to that game. That'd be pretty rad. Which then turned into we should also go to Paris while we're there, and we should also go to Wales to visit my former business partner when I had my architectural woodworking business. So it turned into 11 days of running around France and the UK. So
you sent us all pictures of your amazing adventure, and that'll be part of the after show too. So I think it's going to be amazing. I look forward to talking about that more. How has it been coming back to work after 2+ weeks away?
Pretty good, actually. The project management team that we have that really handles the day-to-day at TDS for the production department did a great job. As I was telling Patrick before the show, they only had to bother me once to approve one invoice for a job they knew nothing about. So I consider that to be pretty good.
That's a good team, and it sounds like you've been a good manager to let them, do their jobs and do it.
Yeah, I like the management philosophy of giving people their brains back. Yeah. I can't remember whose YouTube TED Talk I saw this on, but it was a guy who owns a security firm in Canada, and his whole management mantra is if the employee can think about a decision that they have to make and say that it's the right thing for the client, it's the right thing for the project, and the right thing for the company, they should just do it and not think about it too hard. So tried to install that in the people that work for me.
Building
Go ahead, Kylie. Sorry.
And building redundancy into your business practice or your business model is so important. It's really like you need to be able to step away or, God forbid, get sick, or you need to know that the people on your team are going to be able to step up to the plate and have the skills necessary to take over.
Yeah, and more important than the skills is the confidence to make that decision without having to run around and try and find somebody to tell them that their first instinct was correct anyway.
Yeah.
Kylie, what have you been up to? How's your homestead?
Oh, I actually thought I might take this opportunity to plug Allison Bale's book. I don't know if listeners are familiar with Allison, but he's a regular. Well, he's all sorts of things. He's an he's an HVAC consultant expert. Just an all around. He's a contributor to GBA. He has his own blog, Energy Vanguard. He's just such a wealth of information. But beyond that, he has this wonderful talent for disseminating technical and complex information for anybody to understand. And I actually attended a webinar yesterday whereby he was talking about some of the material in his book, which is titled "A House Needs to Breathe." ... Does it? And I actually, to be honest, I haven't gotten my hands on a copy yet, but I'm ordering both a copy for myself and for Martin Holliday, who I asked to do a review of the book, and he was excited to do so. So look for that on GBA. But for anybody, homeowner, builder, I mean, we said the same thing about a Pretty Good House book. I think the same applies here. It will be a little bit more technical because of the nature of the material. The focus is primarily on mechanicals. But anyway, I just really want people to read this book, pick it up. I think we could all benefit from it. So I'm looking forward to reading it myself. Allison had me look at drafts of it prior to, publication, and I was very touched by that, but I'm looking forward to seeing it in the final version.
We'll put a link to that on our podcast page if folks want to check out what Allison has done. I think it's, one of those building science titles that will be long remembered and pivotal in our understanding of indoor air quality and comfort, HVAC systems, all those things.
Yep, exactly.
Jeff, you revealed ahead of the show that you're once again working on appliances, which seems to be a regular pursuit of you.
That does seem to be your hobby.
Yeah, well, yeah. I actually, this wasn't really working on the appliances. We're replacing an appliance. We got a new wall oven, so I had to take the old one out, and the new one was significantly larger than the old one, so I had to do some modifications to the cabinet.
How significantly larger?
Well, the big thing, which was relatively easy, was probably about 4 inches taller. But the cabinet, the cutout in the existing cabinet, actually had to be reduced for the wall oven that came out. So there was a couple of inches that was ready to come, just take out a couple of screws and it's done. And then just had to cut like half an inch or so up above on the rail.
And you did this in place?
Yes. Yeah, because there's a big, floor-to-ceiling cabinet. Just a little trim router and some straight edges and lots of sawdust. And
I bet that made a colossal mess.
Jeff, didn't you spend a ton of time last year fixing your Dutch oven? So I feel like
I dug into it and basically determined that it was like the main control board, and if I could have gotten one, it would have been expensive, and I still would have had an 18-year-old oven with some iffy hinges. And
so did you find this like on clearance at the home center, like I've known you to do in the past?
Not on clearance, but it was at an appliance place and scratch and dent, and so I did get a good deal on it.
Cool.
you're so handy. I love it.
Well, I tell
My
you
mother
what,
has a double oven too, Jeff, and her control board went out on it, and she was very excited to get a new one until my dad ordered another control board for it and swapped it out. So she is also the proud owner of a still working 18-year-old double oven.
One day she'll get her new oven.
I think she
Sure.
should just buy an oven, right?
Yeah.
That's what I tell her all the time.
I am so happy to be back in the home studio after 2 weeks on the road recording. That was fun, but it's nice to have my my space.
Sure.
I look forward to the after show. We're going to talk more about your trip, Ian, but let's get to it. So we heard from Doug, who had some thoughts on subslab insulation. It seems the sundry internet building gurus / sites are almost universally, reflexively even, urging for full subslab insulation in basements. We can stipulate that basement wall is a given, and let's assume subslab vapor barriers are intact. However, in Maryland, the code calls for 2 feet of R10 on the perimeter. Of course, this doesn't address walkout situations where you have the front of the house insulated with 9 feet of earth, which is easily R10 plus, and the other side with no earth insulating. Is this because most of these building science gurus hail from colder climates, or a building on a slab, not a full basement? What is the real imperative of subslab insulation for the entirety of a full basement that has anywhere from R10 to R20 plus of earth, shielding it from a constant 55-degree soil temp below the frost line? Thanks, Doug. Well, I look back in I'm embarrassed to say the newest code book I have here in my office is 2012, and even then it was calling for 2 feet of R10 under basement slabs. So
I would like to share something that Dana Dorset, who's an engineer and very active on GBA, shared as a response to a question that's similar to what our listener is asking. He said, the code doesn't demand it, but in humid climates, there may be rationale for 1 to 1.5 inches of EPS under the slab to keep that musty basement smell at bay during a humid summer when the slab temperature could otherwise be well below the ventilation air's dew point and could still have a life cycle rationale on energy costs. And he shared what I think Doug might appreciate, a resource. The primary author is John Straub, but also lots of other building scientists contributed. And the title of it, and I'll share this in the show notes, is High R Value Enclosures for High Performance Residential Buildings in All Climate Zones. And I started to dig into it, 60 pages long, but really interesting stuff there. And it explains why, a high R value enclosure, no matter your climate, is important. And it does address crawl spaces and basements, not just the walls, but, underneath the slab. So just something to take a look at.
what do you think, Ian?
I think you only get a chance to do that install once, and it's pretty inexpensive. So why not do it? That would be my thought. But you have to think too about the future use of a basement space. If you are going to turn it into some type of living space down the road, it would behoove you to have that slab insulated so you don't lose heat down through the slab.
Jeff, you got thoughts on this?
No, I'm just kind of thinking about, the 10, 15 degree temperature differential could be enough to, affect the climate inside the basement space.
Yeah, you're going to have a condensing surface. Yeah. I think is Kiley. We're all saying it. It's not just about heat loss. It's about keeping that concrete warmer so it doesn't puddle water in the summertime, make all your stuff get nasty.
So far, we haven't had any issues with that in our basement where we did the subslab insulation and haven't had any condensation on the exposed slab that I'm too cheap to put flooring over.
I would say you're just waiting for the right time. That's what
I think the right time's never going to come.
Here's some feedback from John. I listened to your recent podcast number 501 and was struck by the discussion of the place in Silver Spring, Maryland. I have previously sent you a few messages about my house, which you shockingly used on your show. Our house is not far from the listener's location, so I think my experience is relevant. When we did some renovation on our house, which was a bit over $150,000, our in-laws built an entirely new house from scratch on an empty lot for only $100,000 more. It was a 2-story with a walkout basement and attached large garage. Our renovation improved the quality of the house and its existing footprint, but it did not improve the energy efficiency. We considered doing a bulldozer renovation, but when we talked to builders in our area, it was incredibly expensive, so we didn't go that route. And we went with someone who made what we have a little better. Regarding the in-laws' new house, some background information. The foundation was by Superior Walls, If you guys don't know what that is listening, it's precast foundation panels that they bring in with a crane and set on a compacted gravel pad. The home was by SMI Structural Modulars Incorporated. From raw ground to weathered in was about 5 days. If I was able to do it over again and had an extra $100,000, the renovation would have been much faster, more energy efficient, and had a better outcome. He puts renovation in quotes, I think is what he's talking about, bulldozing the existing home.
Oh, the things we could all do to our houses with an extra $100,000.
That's a good point. Yeah. So, Kiley, I don't know if you listened to the episode where this was discussed, but somebody wrote in and they wanted to do like some improvements to their house, and it was a new build, and it was quite a bit more expensive than they could afford. So, my suggestion was to make their existing house more livable with build-ins or whatever it takes to make it live larger.
Gotcha. Live larger. I like that. That's well put.
Why is stuff gotten so expensive, Ian?
Some of it's come back down, but I still think a lot of it has to do with labor. People in the field are getting paid a lot more money than they did pre-COVID, just due to demand and due to people who in their late 50s, early 60s, COVID showed them what not working was going to look like, and the ones who could afford to, they're all gone. They've left the workforce. And that's happened in a lot of areas outside of construction as well.
I've heard like $300 a square foot is like the absolute starting price point now. Is that, you think that's a fair statement?
I think that's a fair statement. And for anything custom, I think you're up over 400. For anything high performance and custom, I think you're up over 5.
I remember when I first joined the Fine Homebuilding team, and all of the stories that I worked on, they were primarily design related, but we always had this spec box where we would include the cost per square foot. And at one point, it was decided that we should stop including that cost because it was so discouraging. I was like, who can afford $300 per square foot? Man alive, that's expensive.
But it's also understanding the difference in delivery system from some giant company like Horton or Pulte Homes that builds tens of thousands of homes a year in very few different designs versus somebody like TDS where I'm at that build whatever you want if you're willing and able to pay for it. The sky's the limit in design. It's two very different delivery models.
But yeah.
Oftentimes people are still locked into that lower cost model and have a difficult time understanding why it doesn't carry through into a custom project.
Yeah.
Especially when you start talking about things being double or almost double the cost.
I passed a new subdivision on our commute to Liam's school, and what struck me about these new homes they're building is how big they are for starters, and how like insanely complicated the truss roofs are, and it's all just completely wasted space. It has no attachment to the house except for maybe the great room, where it has a sloping ceiling or some kind of soaring ceiling, but otherwise it's just like complete volume that does nothing.
Right, that you have to condition.
Well, these are probably going to be, unconditioned attics, but
I see what you're saying. Okay.
I'm guessing that they're probably going to be done poorly given they do connect to the living space in certain places. And, I'm not seeing any blocking, let's just say.
I'll tease the after show topic a little bit, but one of the places that we stayed in Godalming in Surrey in England, it's about an hour and 20 minutes southwest of London. Our friends own a 750 square foot townhouse that they paid the equivalent of $500,000 for.
Oh my God.
And it's not in London.
No, and it's still, an hour and a half by train. And
Is it in a rural
to,
setting, or I don't know if they have suburbs in that area, but
I would say it's very similar to like New Milford, Connecticut. So
Okay.
that,
a little bit urban.
15, 20,000 people city. But the cities all string together, so it's much like the Route 7 corridor of Connecticut, where cities start to just bleed into the next one.
If we have any English listeners, they are like losing their mind at the comparison.
Probably.
Route 7, Southern Connecticut.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Route 7 is straight. I don't think I was on a single straight road while we were in the UK.
And there's good reason for that.
Yeah.
Well, here we go. This comes from Cory. Hello, Fine Homebuilding podcasters. Love the show. I'm new but resourceful and enthusiastic DIYer, and your discussion in a few days on habitat builds has given me the confidence to push forward up the learning curve with improvements on our own home. About 2 years ago, we bought a 1950 home on the border of climate zone 4 and 5 in Bloomington, Indiana. As far as I can tell, my exterior walls are as follows, working outward. 1 to 2 layers of drywall, framing, empty cavities, 3/4 or 1 inch of fiberboard, original wood lap siding, aluminum siding that's topped off with a layer of dull pink paint. My intent is to tear off the aluminum and wood lap, sheathe with 7/16 inch zip panels taped, flashed, and put vinyl siding over that. If I discard the fiberboard and stuff the cavities with fiberglass bat, am I going to rot out my walls? There's no air barrier on the interior of the walls. My house sits on a basement with a mud sill sitting directly on uncapped concrete block walls, and I fear they move significant humidity upward along my exterior walls, though I don't know actually how likely this is. We dehumidify the basement to about 65% in the summer, and it drops below that naturally in the winter. We keep the upstairs at similar levels and run the HVAC modestly. Above the walls is an unconditioned attic with blown-in cellulose over some fiberglass bats. To say this house has been able to breathe is an understatement. Am I going to suffocate it if I stuff a bunch of fiberglass into it? Our energy bills are already pretty reasonable, so more expensive insulation options are unlikely to be cost effective. But while I have the walls open, I'm very tempted to boost our overall R value. Thanks in advance, Cory. All right, wow, what do we think, team? We got quite a stack up here. We got aluminum siding, we got wood lap siding, we have fiberboard sheathing, uninsulated stud cavities, and a drywall on the inside. So Cory says he doesn't have an air barrier, but I would argue he has drywall, which is a pretty good air barrier, provided it's well sealed. Who wants to dive in?
I think it's a good idea for him to put something in the cavity, since he's already got his head around going that deep into the siding work, pulling it all off and pulling the fiberboard sheathing off. I don't think he's going to do much to suffocate it with fiberglass insulation. I would strongly urge him to consider netting it and seeing if he can find someone to do dense pack in those walls. Since he's going to have them open, it would be a pretty straightforward install, but
I have a better idea because of your idea. So why not just sheathe the walls and leave strips open to dense pack? You wouldn't need to net it even, right?
You could do that as well. Yeah. Yeah, you could leave a strip on the top and a strip in the middle maybe, and just have it dense packed that way. You'd have to find somebody that would be willing to do that install for him. But,
how far are you from Bloomington, Indiana?
Quite a few hours.
Okay.
But if he was willing to roll the dice himself, I believe he has a place down there where he could rent the same blower that I rented from Menards and give it a whack himself. But that would be pretty dedicated to do a whole house from the exterior.
Well, I think you'd do like elevation by elevation, right? I mean,
Sure.
You wouldn't have to do it all at once, and
Right.
It would be impossible because you wouldn't be able to keep the weather out.
Hey,
Yeah, it would take a lot more time than fiberglass. I would say that.
Yeah.
and more skill to get it right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to say that you should, Cory, take some spray foam and try and plug the cores of the concrete block at a minimum, because that would at least stop some of the vapor movement from your foundation walls into the building. And that's probably worked until now because those walls could dry and the fiberboard sheathing is super vapor open. So, that water could move through there. But if you start sealing things up, you risk, getting a whole bunch of condensation in there, humidity.
Are you talking about the migration of water from the foundation wall into the framing, Patrick?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. That got me thinking, I realized you have to create some kind of capillary break there, right?
Yep.
Ideally. What is the typical, when I think capillary break, I often think about what Ben Bogey's a fan of, which is, fluid applied waterproofing membrane, for lack of a better word. But that is you typically on top of the footings. So what is the
Sill
general
seal.
material? Huh?
Sill seal.
Sill seal. Okay.
It's like this foamy alleged gasket that goes between the foundation top and the mud sill.
Got it.
And
I guess
it's actually not air impermeable. I've learned recently it's permeable, so you should put sealant on top and the bottom of it, at least a thick bead of it, and scooch that in there, according to Ben. Because you agree, Ian?
Yeah, I used some kind of acoustical sealant that I think Ben suggested to me when I did my house. So I did a bead on the outside half of the sill seal, on the bottom between the sill seal and the top of the wall, and then did another bead on the interior half of the sill seal between the sill seal and the mud sill.
A great product I've never used, but I've heard other people speak very highly, is Resource Conservation Technology makes EPDM gaskets that go in this location that I'm sure work way better and are less messy than other methods.
On the detailed drawings or the construction details that we get regularly from different sources for GBA, is often included.
That's a great company for listeners to know about. Resource Conservation Technology. They make all kinds of stuff for good building connections, making them air and water tight.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I wish the EPDM gasket would have been on my radar when I did it, because I do recall how difficult and messy that installation was.
Mm-hmm.
I forget who was saying at the recent Southeast Building Science Symposium that USG's acoustic sealant is way less messy than the Tremco, and I don't know if that's true. I haven't used that, but that would be great.
Tremco.
It's horrible, right?
Yeah, gets all over everything.
Someone told me that you should just, when you get a tube of that, just start rubbing it on the seats of your truck, because it's going to end up all over it anyway. Might as well get it over with.
That's funny.
Cory, have at it, buddy. I admire your can-do attitude. I think you're going to have a way more comfortable house once you do this work. Tom writes us, hello, FHB folks. I'm installing a linear direct vent gas fireplace in our basement. Any advice on drilling the hole through the foundation wall for the flue? I figured I would get the Harbor Freight rotary hammer drill, but should I drill small holes around the perimeter of the hole and chisel, or pop for a monster core bit? Foundation walls are almost 9 feet tall. There's clear space on the outside of the whole area, and it's a brick house. Any other advice is always welcome. So I asked Tom how big a hole he needed. So it's a 7-inch flue pipe, so he thinks 7 1/4 or 7.5 inch hole, which seems like I would agree. That's at least you need it at least that big to accommodate the pipe and then line it up. Jeff, have you ever drilled a giant hole in a concrete wall?
In a concrete floor, but never a concrete wall.
How'd you do it?
With a hammer drill and just a series of holes, and then break out in between.
And the concrete was probably about 4 inches thick, am I right?
Yep, probably. So, I don't know how an 8-inch wall would work, but
How long did that take?
forever.
Ian, you have thoughts?
Take the money you were going to spend on that Harbor Freight hammer drill and go to an industrial supply place that rents a core drill and rent a core drill on a horizontal rig that you can just use, and they'll probably have bits that you can rent. And I don't know if they'll have a 7 1/4, but they'll have an 8, and yeah, use that.
So what Ian is describing is what looks like a drill press, and you actually bolt it to the wall with anchors, right? You drill smaller holes, put anchors in there of some fashion. You bolt this thing to the wall, and it has a gear mechanism that advances the cord bit, and there's probably a water supply on it, right, to cool it. And this thing is made for this job.
Yep.
My suggestion to Tom was to call a company
Even better.
that already has this and have someone else do it, which would probably cost about the same as renting this. But so
Yes.
Tom was not. He was kind of bored by that very suggestion. He's like, why would I want to do that when I could, drill this hole myself? And all I would say, Tom, is have at it. But as a young, I was probably 10 years old, and my brother was probably 15. And my dad wanted to drill through the concrete retaining wall that was on the side of our driveway to run a downspout leader pipe away from the house. And we started with my uncle's Hilti hammer drill, which is really only made to drill a 1/4-inch hole, right, for nylon anchors or what have you. And I think even before that, we started with a star bit and a hammer. And I wailed on that for an hour because I didn't know any better. And then we started with the hammer drill. Then he finally went to the home center and rented a big rotary hammer that was meant to probably drill a 2-inch hole in concrete. And like Jeff, we drilled a series of holes and then broke it out that way. But I know that took hours to do. And my brother, he bore the brunt of that because he was older, and I remember him trying to manhandle that rotary hammer and hold it, on a vertical surface. And my dad actually went and got the spare tire out of the car to rest the hammer on because that was about the right height. Oh my gosh, it was horrible. So it'll be fun, Tom.
The first house that I owned had a cistern in the basement, and I was maybe 24, 25 when I owned this house, and I had wanted to knock the cistern wall down so I had room for a little shop in the corner of the basement. And my dad was at the house, and he's like, well, have you hit it with a sledgehammer yet to see, how solid it is, how much trouble it's going to be? The wall was about 10 inches thick of poured concrete. So he and I went down there, and I gave it everything I had with the sledgehammer, hit it, and the sledgehammer bounced off the wall and flew out of my hands. And my dad just shook his head and was like, you're going to have to pay somebody to get rid of that.
Tom, the other thing is there might be rebar in there. If you hit rebar with a core bit, you're done,
That sounds almost physically painful.
No, you need the rig to do that.
People are into all kinds of different stuff. I would say, pick a new hobby, Tom.
Is there a diameter of hole at which you are compromised? I suppose it depends on the thickness of the concrete, but are there some guidelines around, when do you start interrupting the integrity of the structure?
That's a good question. I don't know. I don't think 8 inches would do it, but I'm sure at a point it would be a danger.
Point, yeah, but
the interesting thing about round shapes is they naturally transfer forces, unlike if you cut it in a square. And don't ask me how that works, but
physics.
Some engineer is going to tell me I'm completely bogus. Any other suggestions for Tom's big concrete hole? Anyone?
Pay somebody to do it. Listen to Patrick.
Yep.
This comes from Nick. Nick says, my wife and I recently completed a deep energy retrofit on a 50s era ranch home. As part of our work, we sealed the crawl space and are semi-conditioning it with 2 3-inch ducts off the supply trunk line of the air handler in the crawl space. We also have a whole house dehumidifier to help control humidity in the shoulder seasons. We don't presently have a return air for the crawl space because the home has radon, and we don't want to bring in potentially radon containing air from the basement and spreading it through the house. Can we make use of the makeup air damper that connects to the outside to equalize the pressure on the return ductwork so that we're not increasing infiltration from leaks in the envelope? The field controls makeup damper opens to provide makeup air when our kitchen and bath exhaust fans are running and the dryer. Do we need to undo our sealed crawl space for a radon mitigation system? Oh my goodness. So Nick and I met at the recent Southeast Building Science Symposium.
Oh, cool.
And I told him I would ask the very smart people that listen to the podcast this question, and you all. Kiley, did you have a chance to dig into this? It's a complicated issue.
It is a complicated issue, and honestly, this is one of those areas where I'm like, I can't get my head around it.
I think you're not alone.
So I look forward to hearing what y'all have to say.
I'm waiting for these smart people to show up. There's usually only 4 squares on the squadcast. There's suddenly going to be 2 more people. I'm like, Allison Bales is going to come in and explain this one.
I mean, I know people to ask, but I didn't have the chance to ask them.
That's a really tough problem. The radon really complicates that, doesn't it, Patrick?
Yeah, it sure does. So I think we should first explain what this field controls makeup air damper does, right? So,
by we, you mean you, right?
Yeah.
So when any one of these ventilation things are running, the bath fans, the range hood, the dryer, this provides makeup air, so they're not sucking the radon into their house, right? And presumably it's also for combustion appliances, right? When you're running your gas or oil-fired forced air or water boiler, you need combustion. You need air to replace that's consumed with the combustion and then exhausted as dangerous flue gases. So you need to make up that air that's pushed out of the building up the flue. And this thing is meant to open up so you don't backdraft, which is get the combustion byproducts spilling into the house and poisoning you potentially with carbon monoxide. And even if everything is working correctly and there's not a lot of CO in the flue gases, there's a ton of water vapor, and that can create all kinds of problems with mold and getting framing cavities wet, all kinds of stuff. So you just don't want that to happen. So this thing is meant to provide makeup air for combustion appliances. So his question is, should he be opening this thing when he's running his dehumidifier, right?
But he's worried about the pressure equalization in his sealed crawl space, right?
He doesn't want a condition where it's under negative pressure, which would draw radon into his house.
Right.
But if his crawl space is encapsulated and well done, then isn't there a radon mitigation sort of passive system built into that?
You're saying that if radon containing air can't get through this sealed crawl space liner,
Right, exactly.
then it's less of a problem. And I'm sure you're right about that, Kiley, because you're not letting as much soil gas, come into the house.
Because presumably, I don't know if he said, but you would think he's got some kind of vapor retarder down that would be helping to mitigate the radon, right?
Yeah, I'm sure that's what he meant when he said, encapsulated. I think that's the plastic liner he's talking about. Well, I'm going to appeal to the folks who listen to this show because I think this is beyond our depth, and I'm sure it's painful to hear us speculate on what to do about this. So if any of y'all listening have thoughts for Nick on what he should do with his crawl space, I would love to hear it. So we learned about radon at Allison Bales's recent Building Science Symposium lecture in Chattanooga, and it's still one of those things, and we've heard it from podcast listeners that people are largely unaware of. And I've heard pest control people who have to tell clients that they're in an area with radon containing soils, and because they're crawling around the crawl space, right, looking for bugs, and they need to be the ones to tell their clients that, you know, this could be a risk, and they all look at him like, what are you talking about?
Yeah,
Fake news. Probably what they think.
I have worked with on stories Brady Barkdole, who is a builder in Victor, Idaho, which apparently is a part of the country that has some of the highest radon levels anywhere.
Really?
Yeah, which I didn't know, but that's what he said. So this is a huge piece of his work. He's always that's just part of every single project is radon mitigation. Randy Williams is another one who regularly, I think, and in fact, he has contributed at least one article to GBA about this topic, passive versus active systems. But I know he's also somebody who regularly has to deal with that and explain it to clients. So, yeah, I think when I bought my house, I remember that was my first introduction to radon, because you have to.
So you had never known about it prior to that, Kiley?
I didn't. I mean,
interesting.
Like if you don't own
Yeah.
a house, I mean, it's not something that comes up regularly. But part of the process is being, I guess that's part of the home inspection and getting the radon tested.
When we
Well,
sold our house in New York, they were very concerned about the radon, and we had to put some radon test capsules all over different areas of the house,
what I did,
because
yeah.
we had the basically just a dirt crawl space underneath the house, and there was a lot of concern about it. I think that New York, Connecticut, Massachusetts border area is also pretty high for radon.
Do you all know if that being part of a home inspection, is that common, or is that just like region specific where you have to test for radon?
I believe it's state rules that govern radon testing for real estate transfers, but I'm not totally sure about that. But the two homes we bought, both states, Connecticut and Vermont, required it. So.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it was required in New York or if it was just due diligence on the part of the seller.
The other thing I learned this is a little bit of a non sequitur, but I heard from one of our listeners, Jason Webster, who's the owner of Huntington Homes, who I interviewed in a Pro Talk, I don't know, more than a year ago. But in the 2021 code, much of the country is going to have continuous insulation, starting at like zone 4, I believe it is. And I was kind of shocked about this. I mean, the building envelopes I see on most of the new homes going up are not even ready for like normal assemblies. Like they are not doing a good job of flashing and doing water management. And when we start putting foam on these houses, those details get even harder. I am wondering about the rationale for this.
All of the bigger home builders that I've done work for in my career all sheathe their houses with foam already. So I think that the ones that don't will probably move to that same type of assembly where you have a 2x6 wall sheathed in exterior foam with lots of metal strapping on the framing to keep it to give it shear strength.
Patrick, that seems like such a good point. Retrofitting homes for energy efficiency is such a big topic right now. And
well, this is new homes, Kiley, but
regardless, in either situation, it strikes me that just putting exterior insulation on the outside of a house, like if you don't get all of the other details that relate to that, right, then you're creating a situation that it could be more problematic than a solution, right?
I'm going to read Jason's email, if you guys will hold on a sec while I pull this up. Hello, Patrick and crew. I just listened to episode 503 and the reader letter and discussion around building codes, building officials, and code enforcement in Vermont. The short answer, sans Burlington and a handful of other towns, is there is none. Single-family residential construction in Vermont is truly the Wild West. There's no licensure for builders, no training, no certifications. We can't even get the legislation to pass a registry so we can get a list of the people that are building. The only pseudocode for single family that we do have is an energy code, and that code is self-certification and with no enforcement. Historically, no building code hasn't been much of an issue because, one, generally we're an honest bunch, and two, would-be codes have, for the most part, been a codification of good general building practice. But as we go through time and houses get tighter and tighter, problem areas are amplified. The heat pushing through the bad/leaky wall isn't enough to dry it out. Vapor retarders, insulation types, and their location matter more and more. Doing it wrong has consequences. Your audience knows this. Unfortunately, not every builder in Vermont listens to this podcast. Things are, in my opinion, about to get way worse in Vermont. The Vermont Department of Public Service is currently working on an update to our energy code using the 2021 IECC as a basis. Unlike other neighboring states that review new code amendments through the lens of their building code or plumbing code or electrical code, the Vermont review is in a vacuum. It reviews energy with regard to enforcement, and it's about to ban cavity-based insulation systems. The new minimum basic will require R12 continuous insulation. There are handfuls of really good Vermont builders that know how to detail this new wall assembly correctly, but there are handfuls of builders that don't know and no building official to tell them and not to. You can't use a polyvapor barrier, fiberglass bat, and foil-faced foam. This second group of builders might be able to figure out how to use some tape to keep the bulk water out, but ain't nobody around here to tell them that their wall assembly just started to compost. So for anyone looking to move to Vermont or buy a second home here, when I'm saying Vermont sucks, tell your friends. I highly recommend you find out who built the house and do some research on their chops, because no building official is going to inspect it. Keep up the good work for those listening. Wow, what do you guys think?
We sure hear that about Vermont regularly, it seems to me.
That's intense.
Yeah.
Isn't
I think he's right.
Yeah.
Vermont and Maine both have little to no enforcement for any kind of building code, right?
You think it's because they have so little housing? I mean, why is it such a Wild West?
I think it's a couple things. I think it's just rural, right? There's just not enough housing, as you suggest, Kiley. And the other thing is, I don't think builders look to get enforced. They don't want that, right? It's another hassle. And if you're a good builder, I think that's okay.
We're not out there going, we need more enforcement now.
Right.
More regulation now.
I think Jason's right. And what worries me more for the other parts of the country is I am guessing there are not building inspectors trained to do these details and wall assemblies correctly. Am I right?
It stands to reason.
Yeah. It'll be interesting in my state, in Wisconsin, to see how they handle these changes with the small municipalities that will shop their building inspector out to some large company. So you may have a large engineering firm that employs a dozen inspectors that do 10, 15 different municipalities each. So it'd be interesting to see how they keep up with the training for those, we oftentimes call them renta inspectors.
So are they third party or are they municipal employees?
Third party. It's a contract with the municipality.
Jeff, what do you think about this? Do you think our builders are ready for new rules about continuous insulation?
I think, certainly there are a large group that is, but an even larger group that is not, because they're still thinking it's the 70s.
Yeah.
It's
or
weird
the 50s.
Right.
Well, at least they're putting fiberglass in there. Loosely.
It's sort of strange to focus on just one aspect of the assembly, right? It's like adding exterior insulation as like a 3-in-1 solution or something. It's not, right? It's just like one piece of the assembly. It doesn't solve all problems, and in fact, it can create a lot of problems. So,
and more
you can't think of it in such a silo.
Yeah,
right.
And more importantly, what works really good in northern Maine and northern Minnesota is probably not something that you want to do in San Antonio, Texas.
Maybe.
Maybe, yeah. Or, there's things that you would do down in San Antonio that you wouldn't do by me in Madison.
Right.
The thing I worry about is the potential for insects and termites. I was talking to Dan Heckman, who's a pest control expert in the Chattanooga area, which is a pretty termite-heavy area. Mm-hmm. And he showed me a photo of supposedly borate-treated EPS foam with a giant termite nest in it. And I'm like thinking, if you're going to wrap the entire house and if it has any envelope problems whatsoever, that's going to be just a caviar for termites.
Yeah. Yes, termite, what do you call it, remediation, or it's interesting. I traveled to Austin to talk with a design firm with Brian Pontalillo years ago, but that was the first time I'd really given thought to the fact that in some areas of the country, that is a huge, when you're Northeast centric, you're always talking about heat loss and cold and heating loads, but it's like as important an issue in other climates to be looking at assemblies that are termite resistant, which is a whole other, set of circumstances that not everybody thinks about.
My first experience was when I went to North Carolina in the mid 2000s for a family wedding and made the comment of, man, there's a lot of brick houses down here. And one of the North Carolina natives was like, yeah, you can't put wood on the exterior of a house down here. It'd be gone.
Right.
I was like, what do you mean it'd be gone? He's like, have you ever heard of termites? I was like, what's a termite?
I'm guessing there's a pretty low likelihood of termites in Wisconsin, but I bet you do have carpenter ants, right?
Yeah. We do, yeah. And I've done renovation work on homes where carpenter ants had destroyed large sections of wall assemblies.
Mm-hmm.
I visited one of your projects in the Hudson Valley that was largely missing because of termites, right?
Yeah.
Wait, the Hudson Valley? New York?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Termite issues?
It was either that or carpenter ants. I can't remember on that one. I believe that was the one that we replaced a large section of timber frame sill on. I think they had eaten out the whole front, 2/3 of this timber frame beam.
Isn't it amazing how redundant wood frame construction is? That shouldn't work, right?
No, it shouldn't work, but it's a big takeaway that I got from when I went to the Timber Framers Guild conference with Mason and Dave from Hudson Valley Preservation, where one of the guys, there was an interesting mix of timber framers, engineers, designers, and just many different disciplines at this talk. And one of the timber framers stood up and just made the comment of, you engineers are always telling me none of these buildings should stand, but you should see the stuff that I've torn apart that hasn't moved at all, and you tell me it shouldn't even stand the way it is.
Wow. So speaking of historic construction, the after show is going to focus on Ian's travels to the UK and France. And he has amazing photos that I hope to go through. And you got to tell folks about the bridge in Wales that it is a series of bridges. That had to be the most interesting thing among all your interesting photos.
It was. So it's the Devil's Bridge. It's a pretty well-known landmark in mid-Wales. I'm not even going to try and butcher the name of the town that it's in, but it's easily Googleable.
We're already upsetting our UK listeners.
Most UK listeners would be like, yeah, don't bother trying to pronounce too many Welsh city names. But so it's a stack of 3 bridges, and they just kept building another bridge on top of another bridge. The original bridge dates to somewhere between 1075 and 1200. And then the next bridge, I think, was 1750s. And then in 1900, they built an actual bridge over the top of the 1750s bridge to handle motor vehicle traffic. But it was, they have a little walkway that, you put 2-pound coins into a little thing like you see on a pool table, and then you can go through a turnstile and walk down to sort of the ravine below the bridge and look back at it. But it was one of the more interesting things that we saw.
Your photos from the top of the Arc de Triomphe were pretty freaking amazing too.
That was the highlight of the trip for me. All 280 stairs to get to the top.
Did you climb them?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
Lots
if that
of stairs. They love their stairs in Europe, apparently. Because we went to an old tube station in London, and there's a sign at the top of the stairs that says there are 180 stairs to get to the bottom of to get to the platform, or something like that. We did that one too. There was another viewing tower in London that I wanted to try and find because it had 500 some stairs to get to the top.
I like your attitude.
I couldn't get over to that one.
Well, if that doesn't entice you all to become all access members to Fine Homebuilding, I honestly don't know what is going to do it. So, but if you are a member, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Any parting words before we pick it up again?
Can I ask a quick question, just as an aside that relates to somebody's question earlier? I wondered if using zip system sheathing with vinyl siding is unusual.
I don't see it a lot around here because, vinyl sided projects are on the lower end of the spectrum, and that would, preclude zip system sheathing for those projects. Mm-hmm. But I think it's a fine assembly. My neighbor did it, who's an engineer on his son's house that he built. And, it's a great WRB. Mm-hmm. And the cool thing about vinyl is it's already a built-in, rain screen. I think it's a good assembly.
Yeah.
One of the things that we're looking at for some builds at TDS is seamless steel siding, which is hung just like vinyl siding and would have that rain screen space built in, very, very similar to what Patrick described with vinyl. So that would be maybe more of a premium product that would get matched up with something like zip.
I can't picture
Brian
that.
Pontilillo put that on his house, and it is drop dead gorgeous. It is so crisp looking. Oh, it's so cool.
Yeah, cool.
He says it's a pain to work with, but cool things often are.
Yep.
Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have today. Come back for the after show. Thanks to Ian, Kiley, and Jeff for joining me, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your comments, questions, and suggestions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. And please like, comment, and review us however you're listening and other folks find our podcast. Stay safe, everybody. Keep craft alive. Thanks very much for listening.